waiting for the new series on BBC iPlayer. All she wants is a career, money and a purpose, not to mention love. Awkwafina is Nora from Queens and she's giving it all her best shot. Streaming now on BBC iPlayer. Hi, on BBC One Northern Ireland, the BBC News at 10 o'clock with Hugh Edwards and Kerry Thompson.
Tonight at 10, ministers seek to reassure the public that the vaccines being used across the UK are effective against variants of the virus. Concerns have been raised after a study suggested the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was less effective against the South African variant, but the official advice is clear.
Do not delay. Have the vaccine that will protect you against the current threat. And don't worry, you can be revaccinated.
And it's confirmed tonight that all passengers arriving in the UK are set to be tested for COVID while they self-isolate. We'll have the latest on that. And people aged 70 or older in England who haven't been called for their vaccination are now being advised to contact the NHS for an appointment. Also tonight, we report on the school's recovery plan for England to help pupils catch up after months away from the classroom. In Myanmar, more protests against the military takeover, as the leaders of the coup say they'll hold new elections in a year's time. The latest on Storm Darcy, with severe weather conditions across eastern regions of England and parts of Scotland. And a rare lockdown benefit, as we meet those who've discovered the joys of walking at night.
And coming up, the Chief Constable says he's not quitting over recent policing mistakes. And DUP MP Gregory Campbell says he won't apologise for comments about black people on songs of praise.
Good evening. There's been a concerted effort today by government and by scientific advisors to reassure people about the efficacy of the vaccines being used in the UK. It follows growing concern about the performance of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, specifically in the context of the South African variant of the virus. Boris Johnson said he was very confident that the current vaccines delivered a high degree of protection against serious illness. And Professor Jonathan Van Tam, who's England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, said it was unlikely in his view that the South African variant would become dominant here in the short term. Now, tonight in England, people aged 70 or older who haven't yet been called for their vaccination are being asked to contact the NHS to book an appointment. Our medical editor Fergus Walsh has the latest.
There is huge public enthusiasm for COVID immunisation. Elland Road, home of Leeds United Football Club, is now a mass vaccination hub. Joshua is 25 and has very severe asthma. He's been shielding at home and has only come out to have his jab.
It was like being locked up, in a way. It was like being kept in a cage, and then having this is like getting the key to get out.
Where have you come from today, Margaret?
Margaret's husband has been in intensive care with COVID for nearly a month.
I just wish this had come earlier so my husband could have had it.
Visiting a COVID testing kit supplier in Derby, the Prime Minister said vaccines are the way out of the pandemic for all of us.
We're very confident in all the vaccines that we're using, and I think it's important for people to bear in mind that all of them we think are effective in delivering a high degree of protection against serious illness and death.
That was in response to a small study in South Africa which suggested the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine offered only limited protection against mild to moderate infection from the main variant there. 147 cases of the South African variant have been detected in the UK, and people in several areas like Worcester are being tested in a bid to prevent it spreading further. Do you think it will be possible to keep the South African variant largely suppressed in the UK?
The early modelling data do not suggest a a transmissibility advantage for this virus. And because of that, there is no reason to think the South African variant will catch up or overtake our current virus in the next few months.
And that's good news because vaccines are highly effective at protecting against the Kent variant, which is dominant here.
My advice to you is very simple. Do not delay. Have the vaccine that will protect you against the current threat. And don't worry, you can be revaccinated.
Anyone over 70 in England who's not yet had their vaccine is being asked to contact the NHS online or by calling 119, as the UK looks well on track to have given around 15 million people in the highest risk groups their first dose by the middle of February. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
As we've been reporting, new vaccines are already in development to protect against the new South African variant of coronavirus. The next phase of the pandemic could increasingly become a game of catch-up as more new variants emerge and new vaccines are developed to tackle them. Our science editor David Shukman considers what might lie ahead.
Around the world, there's now a race between the virus and the vaccines, between the threat of new variants and efforts to stay ahead of them, and the outcome matters to us all. While a first wave of countries, including the UK, should see the majority of their populations vaccinated this year, others won't reach that stage till next year, and many will have to wait for the year after or even longer.
This is a global virus, it's a global pandemic. Until we're all protected, then it could be that a variant in another country mutates so that the current vaccines are no longer effective, and that will come back. So even those people who are vaccinated, they are still going to be at risk of these future variants.
The virus is changing all the time, and when it infects human cells, it takes over and gets them to make millions of copies. But they won't all be the same. Each batch may have some random genetic mistakes, mutations that are usually unimportant, but a few might prove dangerous. So the first task is to track these changes, and that's done by studying the genetic code of the virus. Since December 2019, when it was first confirmed in Wuhan, scientists have monitored what's effectively a family tree with hundreds of different branches. Each of these lines represents one of the many different variants that's emerged over the course of the past year. And it's only by doing this genetic research that we can spot the variants that are worrying in the UK, Brazil, and South Africa. 500,000 British coronavirus samples have gone through genetic screening so far. These machines are among those that have done most of the analysis. But few countries can work on this almost industrial scale, so there's a lot we don't know about how the virus is changing worldwide.
There are thousands or millions of cases globally. There are undoubtedly other variants of COVID that are spreading quickly, but we're just blind to. And any one of those additional strains around the world could confer an advantage for the virus, allow it to reinfect people even though they've been vaccinated. And that's what we want to protect against.
One answer is to have a global screening operation. In West Africa 5 years ago, mobile labs studied the Ebola virus. Something far larger is needed now. And alongside that, the faster the vaccines can be rolled out and adapted as new variants emerge, the safer we'll all be. David Shukman, BBC News.
Time to look at the latest government figures now then. They show there were 14,104 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. That means an average of 17,740 new cases per day in the past week. Across the UK, 29,326 people are in hospital right now with coronavirus. Another 333 deaths were reported. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID test. On average in the past past week, 891 deaths were announced every day, and the total number of UK deaths is now 112,798. Let me give you the latest on the vaccination programme. 278,988 people had a first dose of one of the 3 approved vaccines in the latest 24-hour period, and that takes the overall number of people who've had their first jab to 12,294,006. With that, let's bring in our medical editor, Fergus Walsh, and I suppose, Fergus, I'd ask you to comment on that remarkable figure of over 12 million.
Yeah, the take-up of the COVID vaccine here is extraordinary, Hugh. 91% of those over 80 have had their first dose. 95% of those aged 75 to 79 have had one. Now, that's way above what was expected. And whenever I talk to people at immunisation centres, there is a genuine sense of optimism and relief that they're getting immunised. The Pfizer and the AstraZeneca vaccines are both highly effective against the dominant Kent variant here. So that's why it's vital people continue to come forward. And we should soon see an impact in terms of reduction in hospital numbers and deaths from the vaccination programme. And the longer term goal is to offer a first dose to all those over 50 and with underlying health conditions, 32 million people by May. Now there's news tonight of another new variant of concern in Manchester with extra surge testing there, but we're going to have to get used to that. New variants will emerge all the time, but the vaccines can be fairly easily tweaked. And a bit like flu, we may need a booster, perhaps this autumn, maybe later.
Fergus, good to talk to you. Thank you very much. Fergus Walsh there with the latest analysis, our medical editor. Well, now, it's been confirmed tonight that the testing regime for travellers arriving in the UK is set to be expanded in the coming days. All passengers arriving in the UK are set to be tested for COVID while they self-isolate, and those coming from high-risk countries will continue to quarantine in hotels. Our transport correspondent Caroline Davis is in Whitehall. What more do we know about this, Caroline?
Hugh, this is another layer on top of what is already quite a layered process for international travel coming into the UK. Now, the speculation at this stage is that there will be 2 tests required, one on the 2nd day and one on the 8th day during quarantine, but that is very much speculation at this stage. It is far from official policy. There are questions already about when this policy could be introduced and, of course, how it would be managed, how those tests would be distributed. But speaking to the Department of Health, who haven't confirmed about how many of those tests would take place, they've said that this will be adding a further level of protection to the UK. Now, speaking to those in the aviation industry this evening, there are some concerns. Of course, they understand the importance of having additional public health measures in place, but their worry is that the more and more of these measures that are introduced, the longer it will take for them to be removed, the longer it will take for them to get back up on their feet and have international travel in the way that we used to pre-pandemic. They want the Prime Minister to set out a plan of how we are going to get out of this particular situation.
Caroline, many thanks again. Caroline Davis there for us, our transport correspondent. Well, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, says that tackling the loss of children's learning is the single biggest priority for the government, with a long-term plan for England due to be published later this month. Some experts have voiced their doubts about the likelihood of pupils being able to catch up after missing so many months of schooling over the past year. Our education editor, Branwen Jeffries, has been speaking to Sir Kevin Collins, who's just been appointed to advise the Prime Minister on a recovery plan.
At home in Leicester, Najim is trying not to fall behind. GCSEs are looming next year. Research today shows pupils in years 10 and 11 have lost most confidence. Najim has tutoring paid for from government catch-up funds.
I am a bit worried, to be honest, because of lockdown, and especially that I think that now that just reduces my education a bit. But because of tuition, that boosts my confidence up that I will do good. I will do good if I carry on with this tuition.
His dad says the short-term help is welcome as far as it goes.
It's very important because if they are not confident, especially now in an exam and in GCSE, that will affect his morale
To help them catch up, nothing is yet ruled out. Longer days, shorter summer holidays. The Prime Minister has a new education catch-up advisor. When he spoke to me exclusively, he said decisions were needed soon.
This is the time to listen, but to act quite quickly around things like summer schools, for example, which I do think have promise.
Children's mental health has been one of the big concerns. Do you think they're going to be able to step up and do extra hours of learning?
I think we need to think about the extra hours, not only for learning, but for children to be together, to play, to engage in competitive sport, for music, for drama.
So far, the catch-up efforts have focused on this year and next. But the effects of this pandemic could flow through schools for many years to come, from the youngest children who've missed out on development to those who've lost confidence or interest in learning, leading some to call for a much bigger, bolder vision covering the next 5 to 10 years. Asking teachers to work more hours would not be popular and would face union pushback. Schools want a say in deciding what works.
To have that added on, to have any extras being forced onto the school rather than us choosing what we want and the things we think will help our particular cohort, it would not be helpful. And actually being able to give students a sort of suite of activities and a suite of different ideas that they could do.
Just try and define for you what a call.
Teachers have got used to live streaming lessons, but it's when everyone's back in the classroom that the real journey to catch up can begin. Bronwyn Jeffries, BBC News, Leicester.
In Myanmar, the country formerly known as Burma, mass protests have continued for a third day as tens of thousands of people protested against last week's military coup. In cities right across the country, young activists joined a range of people, including healthcare workers and civil servants, to voice their deep discontent. Water cannon was used by police in the capital today, but so far the protests have been largely peaceful. And demonstrators are calling for the release of elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi and dozens of other members of her party. Now, for the first time since the coup, Myanmar's military ruler has spoken publicly, claiming that last November's election had been fraudulent, and he promised a new vote in a year's time. From Yangon, our correspondent Ning Jiang A sent this report.
Sending a message to the general. For a third day, anger has brought tens of thousands of people out onto the streets. Worried about the future of the country, the people here say that their freedom has once again been taken away.
This generation did not think they would have to do the same resistance against the military rule. Young people hoped they would grow up in a very different Myanmar, open to the world and its possibilities. But now they find themselves battling to restore democracy and end military rule, just like generations before them.
But that fight won't be easy. Their leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, is still under house arrest. And today, the general who put her there spoke for the first time since taking power. Justifying the coup, he said civilian leaders had failed to hold a proper election last November. Across the city, red shirts hang outside homes in support of the protest movement. Inside one apartment, this family say they have been protesting against military rule for 3 generations. For them, history has a way of repeating itself. 44-year-old Tata Aung spent 4 years in prison for protesting.
I feel really bitter about this coup. So it happens again, I said in my heart. I can't sleep thinking that our new generation will suffer this again.
As the protests build, the military is already starting to tighten the grip on the country. Despite mass demonstrations in many cities for days, there is still no sign that the military will back down. Ninja A, BBC News, Yangon.
The former First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond, will not be appearing tomorrow at an official inquiry into the way that the Scottish Government handled allegations of harassment which were made against him. Mr Salmond and the committee have so far failed to agree on the material that can be published. Mr Salmond has accused his successor, Nicola Sturgeon, of misleading the Scottish Parliament, and the rift has exposed deep divisions within the Scottish National Party, as our Scotland editor Sarah Smith reports now.
Alex Salmond was jubilant 2 years ago when he proved in court the procedure used to investigate allegations of sexual harassment against him was unlawful. A Holyrood committee is now investigating how the Scottish Government got it so wrong. Mr Salmond does want to tell his side of the story, but won't appear before the committee if they won't publish evidence he's submitted to them. Nicola Sturgeon says she's looking forward to her turn to give evidence.
In addition to answering all and any questions, I perhaps will also get the opportunity to take head on some of the ridiculous suggestions that have been made about this whole situation.
This has become a very bitter battle between Alex Salmond and his successor Nicola Sturgeon. He accuses her of misleading Parliament and breaching the ministerial code, both of which would be resigning offences. She denies all of that, saying it's nothing but a conspiracy of nonsense. But it could be damaging, just 3 months away from crucial Scottish elections.
Thank you, Convener.
Today, the SNP Chief Executive, who's also Nicola Sturgeon's husband, appeared in front of the virtual committee for the second time.
The whole truth and nothing but the truth.
He was accused of lying under oath.
Yes, Mr Murrow, you made an untruthful statement to this committee. Which is self-evident. I don't think so.
Tory and Labour politicians are now demanding he be investigated for perjury. Mr Murrow was asked to clarify evidence he gave to the same committee in December about a meeting between Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon in their marital home 3 years ago. Crucially, was it an SNP party matter or a government meeting?
You were clear that what was being discussed at that meeting was a Scottish government matter. Is that still your position?
I mean, my evidence was reflecting, my impression, but it's not for me, to speculate the basis or the nature of the meeting.
If his wife, Nicola Sturgeon, was hosting a government meeting, it should have been officially recorded, or she may have broken the rules. She'll be asked about that next week when she's due to appear before the committee. Alex Salmond could yet give evidence if the committee can agree the terms. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Glasgow.
The new US President Joe Biden is calling for an end to the war in Yemen, which is estimated to have killed around 100,000 people. It's been 6 years since a Saudi-led coalition, backed by the US and the UK, intervened in Yemen's civil war, trying to restore the official government to power. But Houthi rebels, backed by Iran, still control most of the country. Just over a month ago, they carried out an attack on the newly formed government in the southern port city of Aden, from where our international correspondent Ola Gearin was granted rare access and sent this report. Some parts of it are distressing.
Aden, a city cradled by mountains, in a country overshadowed by war. It's the seat of power of Yemen's internationally recognized government, which is propped up by Saudi support. But when ministers flew in from exile in Riyadh, this was the welcome. The first of 3 missiles slamming in. The woman screaming in fear is a local journalist, Alia Fuad.
وقع الانفجار الأول في تلك الزاوية. وأول ما وقع الانفجار خفت، حطيت التليفون على أذني بحيث إنه يثبت، وبدأت أجري في تلك الجهة، أجري وأنا كنت مرعوبة وخايفة من صوت الرصاص والانفجار.
Just I saw fire, and I saw so many, people running on the ground, kids, women injured, killed. For a moment, I thought about my family.
Yemen's Foreign Minister Ahmed bin Mubarak saw the full horror from the plane, along with the rest of the newly formed unity government.
I was very optimistic, hope to return to the country, start, the process. As a foreign minister, it was in the top of my agenda to start preparing for peace process and, dealing with all these challenges. We never thought that we're gonna, have such attack.
But in just 60 seconds, 21 people were killed, including aid workers and airport officials. The government blames Iranian-backed Houthi rebels who control most of Yemen. They deny it. The news was broken on this TV channel by their reporter at the scene.
أتمنى أديب أن تنتبه لسلامتك. أديب هل تسمعني؟ أديب؟
Adib al-Janani was killed on the spot on one more dark day for Yemen, leaving behind 5 young children. He died, says his mother Fatoum, who had begged him not to go.
She was having so many plans.
And in another home in Aden, another room full of absence.
She used to have one lovely smile.
Yasmin Al-Awadi was one of those killed. She was Yemen's deputy minister for public works. Do you have any thoughts, any words for the people who would carry out an action like this?
Yeah, I have, it's not only our family that lost a really beloved person. It's like around, I don't know, each and every house that definitely have someone that they lost. I'm sure whoever just did this thing, I'm sure also that he have lost someone on his family. So I'm just saying, let's stop.
Can the conflict be stopped? It's deeply embedded here, and it's playing out against a backdrop of regional rivalries. The new US President, Joe Biden, is pushing for peace. He may need to be ready for the long haul. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Aden.
BBC has announced today that the annual licence fee will increase by £1.50 to £159 a year. The rise, which is in line with inflation, will come into effect on the 1st of April. Storm Darcy has brought severe weather conditions to much of the UK, with heavy snow and ice across eastern regions of England and parts of Scotland. It's the coldest snap since the so-called beast from the east struck back in 2018. Schools and vaccination centres have been forced to close in some areas, with police warning people not to travel. Helena Wilkinson has more details.
In Benfleet in Essex, a bus driver struggled to keep control. Such were the challenging conditions on the road.
He ain't stopping for no one.
In Norfolk, motorists abandoned their cars as snowdrifts stopped them from getting through. Emergency services were also impacted. The county of Kent experienced some of the heaviest snowfall, up to 16 centimetres in some areas. This scene has been repeated across much of eastern England.
Due to Storm Darcy, we had some very strong blustery winds, which has caused a lot of drifting in certain exposed areas, and that's caused a lot of problems on the roads.
The AA says treacherous driving conditions have caused numerous accidents. In Chartham, near Canterbury, local workers helped to keep village life ticking along.
Getting everybody in and out. There aren't anyone snowed in the area, so why not come out and get it done, help out the community a bit.
The weather forced some vaccination centres to close, including several in Suffolk and Essex, as well as Surrey and Norfolk. Coastal towns like Southend-on-Sea in Essex were among those to experience the full force of the adverse weather. As well as heavy snowfall, it's been bitterly cold today. Temperatures in some parts of England are expected to drop to -10 overnight, and the next few nights are set to be the coldest of the winter so far. Helena Wilkinson, BBC News, Southend-on-Sea.
Let's have some cricket news now. England and India heading for a thrilling final day's play in the first test in Chennai. India will need to break a world record to win 420 runs in their final innings. Having dismissed India for 337, the visitors failed to capitalise on their first innings lead. Joe Root out for 40, as England were dismissed for 178 in their second innings. So at the close of play, India were 39 for 1 in pursuit of that massive run target. Now, one of the consequences of lockdown has been the revival of neighbourhoods that were once quiet and where walking has become far more popular. The night walk in particular, when people get a breath of fresh air in the dark, has now become something of a ritual for millions of people. The advice is to stay close to home, to wear something bright, and of course, to keep your distance. Our correspondent David Silito has joined some of the keen walkers who are reclaiming the night.
See you later.
It has for many of us become a lockdown ritual. As darkness descends, instead of settling down, it's the moment to head out. Short winter days often mean the only time we can escape for exercise is after dark. Caroline, I'm guessing?
Hello.
Caroline Whiteman is a passionate night walker.
Our hearing becomes more sensitive. My sense of smell is more acute. And you can really appreciate the air on your face in a way that during daylight hours, these things go unnoticed.
With short winter days and lockdown, walking and running in the dark has for many of us become a daily ritual.
When things do eventually return to normal, maybe we'll remember all of this as just a fleeting phenomenon, but it is already starting to make people think. So it's much busier in the streets, isn't it, than it normally is?
It certainly is. And
I joined Professor Loretta Lees. Her specialism, how life is changing in towns and cities.
Do you think there'll be a positive benefit?
I think it will change people's perceptions of safety in their own city. They will realise that perhaps it's not as unsafe as they'd, hitherto thought. Here we have somebody else with a light who's coming along.
You are not alone.
This is proof I'm not alone.
Thoughts also shared by Caroline, who feels this is a freedom we should consider more.
This does fly in the face of advice, especially for women, about not going out, walking at night.
I agree, and I would challenge that and say that everybody should be entitled to have an experience and have an adventure by night, and that shouldn't just be the preserve of men. We've been conditioned as women to believe that we have no place out in the night, and yet when you can create a place of safety for yourself whilst night walking, it builds confidence.
It's different neighbourhood to neighbourhood, but for some of us, lockdown has made the dark a little less forbidding. David Silito, BBC News, Seaford.
That's it. Now, BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.